is River Valley Civilizations. I got the perfect song. It's Take Me to the River by the Talking Heads. Listen to this jam. You can just dance. You just... dance right across that camera. This is serious business, the Talking Heads. Psycho killer, once in a lifetime. Just look at the video. Take me to the river for my River Valley Civilizations lessons. Here we go. It's a Global 2.5. Make sure you put it in your notebook. Let's get the notes set up. River Valley Civilizations. Remember, we've covered the Paleolithic Revolution. We've transitioned over to the Neolithic Revolution. That Neolithic Revolution saw upright walking hominids like Cro-Magnon, eventually Homo sapiens, settling down, domesticating animals, raising their food, their crops, and their animals like right next to where they've settled down. We saw the earliest types of human civilization in Catalhayuk, Turkey. And today we're going to head on down the timeline into a more recent River Valley civilizations. And we're going to probably cover 3 case studies. We're probably going to do 1, 2, 3 of them. And we're going to start with our first case study today, the Sumerians of Mesopotamia. And for purposes of this video, we got to keep these videos short. I can't bore you for full 40 minutes straight. So we're going to do a real quick video today looking at the Sumerians through the eyes of a historian and through the eyes of a geographer. And we'll probably keep the video short and sweet in that fashion. We'll look at the history and the geography of these ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. I'm going to shift over real quick. You're going to want to take these notes, and I'll shift back and forth from the board to our presentation. But we are going to want to switch back and forth between this PowerPoint presentation and the board. Okay, so here is the PowerPoint presentation here. And taking a look at the history of the Sumerians, we see that this is a period of 5,000 years before Christ to 1 Common Era. Or if you would like to think of before Christ as before Common Era, you see BCE, that's before Common Era. Now, the nice thing of the BC AD calendar and the before Common Era and Common Era calendars, the nice thing is that they both use the birth of Christ sort of as the mark of the year 1. So when we talk about before Common Era, you can think of that as before Christ, and then Common Era is AD, if you want to think of it that way. Okay, and the history, the timeline here is set up pretty strongly. And if I can find like a little bit better of a picture of it, here it is. If I take a look at the timeline, we see that if we go back to about 5,000 BCE, before Common Era, and you had an ancient culture known as the Sumerians. And the Sumerians lived in an area and with a city that would eventually known as Uruk, and eventually the city of Ur. So the Sumerians lived in Uruk. Now let's keep that in mind when we get to the geography lesson in a few minutes. I think that we have a country that today we call Iraq, which probably sounds a lot like Uruk. And so when we think of the Sumerians of Mesopotamia, we're going to think of like modern day Iraq. And by about 3,500 BCE, so maybe about 1,500 years later, you start to see the ancient city of Babylon, the kingdom of Babylon, start to form, and eventually the Assyrians and the Persians. And when we get to the geography of these places, we'll take a look at that on the map a little bit closer. Coming back to our presentation then, what do we need in our notes? We need kind of a representation that Ur is modern day Iraq, and then that would eventually become, this area would contain the kingdom of Babylon and the kingdoms of ancient Assyria and ancient Persia. And so coming back to our video, let's start here. So a historian is going to look at, I'm just going to basically turn what we just saw in the PowerPoint presentation into note form. I got to do it from memory, which I'm not really used to, but I'm going to go for it. About 5,000 before Common Era or BC. About 5,000 BCE, you saw the situation where Sumeria forms. And this is the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. And Sumeria is going to contain Uruk, which we will refer to as modern Iraq, which is spelled IRAQ. And that's sort of the modern area of the world that we're talking about. Getting into around 3,500 before Common Era, you start to see the ancient kingdom of Babylon form. And then about 500 to 1,000 years later, around 2500 BCE, and again, these are just estimates, somewhere around 2500 BCE, we start to see the development of ancient Assyria, the kingdom of ancient Assyria, and ancient Persia. These huge kingdoms. And when we get to the geography here in a minute, this will make a little bit more sense. We are going to do a summary here. We're going to refer to this whole time period as the Bronze Age. Because this was, whoa, can't spell so good, guys. The Bronze Age, because this was about the time in human history. Not only did these early upright walking humans, eventually develop this Neolithic way of life where they settled down, they started to make more complex tools. It wasn't such simplistic tools anymore, and the whole idea of bronze and smelting metal started to appear, and they actually had metal tools and other metal goods by the time this time period of history rolls around. Okay, so this is our Bronze Age. Again, historians always interested in sort of the timeline setup, and that's the basic timeline setup. If we swing over to the geography, so I'm going to just cut back to, if I can shrink that up and cut back to our slideshow. So here is, again, we'll just take a look at some of these bronze tools. They made tools out of bronze and other copper alloys, and this is the tail end of the Neolithic Revolution as it turns into the Bronze Age. Here is the Babylon, the Kingdom of Babylon's Hanging Gardens, which very sort of more modern architecture, a little bit more modern ideas of moving water around and using water for irrigation, right? Being able to stream water and direct water to places where you want it for the purposes of growing crops and other things. So that is the history of the Sumerians through the eyes of a historian. Let's take a look at the history of Sumeria through the eyes of a geographer. And what we want to focus on is this area of the Middle East, which is modern Iraq, as we mentioned, modern Syria. When we talk about the kingdom of Assyria, that would be today what is modern Syria, which we'll see on the map in a moment. And this is an area nicknamed Mesopotamia, or referred to as Mesopotamia, but nicknamed the Fertile Crescent. And it's called the Fertile Crescent very simply because of the rivers that move through this area. I'm going to leave the PowerPoint presentation, swing on over here to the map. Hopefully my video didn't end just now when I pressed escape. And when I shift over here, we see these river areas coming up, out of the Persian Gulf, or flowing actually out of the mountains of Turkey. The water would be running this way. And you see two river valleys, the Euphrates and the Tigris, and they kind of become one giant river valley. And you can even see from outer space here, we can see the snow-capped hills up in the mountains. We can also see this rich green area. And it's called the Fertile Crescent because this sort of greenish area stretches all the way over to the Mediterranean and then down the coast of the Mediterranean. So this green area that is in the shape of a crescent is the Fertile Crescent. I think this kind of little inset right here that we're looking at sort of shows it pretty well. On this one, it actually over encompasses ancient Egypt, but we're going to cover that separately. Great. Swinging back to the board, right? What do we need to know for our notes? We need to know that Mesopotamia is nicknamed the Fertile Crescent. And we've watched a video previously on how silt forms in river valleys due to flooding. And this layer of silt throughout the floodplain of Mesopotamia, throughout that Fertile Crescent, that flooded land leads to silt deposits, and it's very nutrient rich. And it is great for crop growth. And that is the history and geography of Mesopotamia, especially these ancient Sumerians that we're focusing on. I just want to show you one last time on the map. If I shrink that down and we take a look at this map again, we see that this would be sort of overlap with what is today modern Iraq. And that's just the last thing I wanted to show you. So when we talk about Mesopotamia, we're really talking about this Fertile Crescent area, especially modern day Iraq, especially modern day Syria, which is right here. And then the ancient Persians are from modern day Iran over here. Okay, which those two aren't labeled on the map, but we see Iraq is. Great. That's going to be, we're going to publish that right there onto my channel videos. And that's it for the history and geography of the ancient Sumerians. I'll see you again probably tomorrow. We'll get into the anthropology, the culture, and perhaps even the economics of these ancient Sumerians. Adios!